Welcome to the MindSolve podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jonathan. The topic of this episode is mindfulness work-life integration. The goal is to invite you as listener to reflect on how you are experiencing stress, managing your work and your personal life responsibilities. In this episode, I will interview my friend, LJ Lumpkin III, who happens to be a phenomenal talent and professional, licensed clinical psychotherapist, a corporate coach, a speaker, an author, and the owner of Nomad Healing Practices based in Carlsbad, California. Before we get into some of the interview questions I have for LJ, I'm going to turn it over to him just to provide an overview of his great professional background and experiences practicing mindfulness. LJ, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here. My background in mindfulness, it's been rooted in my clinical experience over the last 12 years, working within inpatient programs, residential treatment centers, in and out of corporate America, and just really noticing that most of our issues, traumas, anxieties, fears are coming from the future or based in the past experiences. As I've worked with a lot of clients around trauma and anxiety, and even my own experiences with mental health, finding a way to incorporate mindfulness has been very impactful. A lot of my focus now has been working with psychedelic assisted therapy and training other therapists in ketamine assisted therapy as well, as these are the approaches that we're finding a lot of positive results working with clients that have had symptoms for many years. So that engages a lot of my excitement, as the mindfulness practice is the base of being able to start the healing process.
That's wonderful, LJ. And I really love the connection that you and I have with mindfulness. That's part of my background. And one of the ways it was described, I think there was when I was attending Pepperdine University, is that looking at your approach therapeutically, mindfulness is like the pizza crust for me. And then the toppings are the different elements and interventions that I put on top of that. But mindfulness is always under the surface of everything that I do. And I think we have that in common.
I love that. And when I was teaching at Pepperdine, I may have annoyed a couple of my students, but every class we started with breathing techniques. We started with cultivating some new practice to use through the weeks. As you know, when you start off seeing clients and dealing with other people's stressors, to be able to ground yourself in that awareness and really be present with what intervention works the best for that particular client. It's nice when you have your own grounded awareness.
Absolutely. I fully agree. So I have a biased opinion on that, but I'm in agreement with you. All right. So what I want to do, LJ, before we get into the interview questions, I want to establish for the listeners some context in terms of when we talk about work-life integration, because that concept in practice is still relatively new and not as long-term known as work-life balance concept. So here's what I'll do is I'll talk about both of them. So, and I can remember back in my experience in working in corporate America of 29 years experience as an executive, that there was this idea that we really wanted to help professionals have this work-life balance, which included this two-dimensional way of thinking that you experience work on work time, you shut it off, you shut your brain and your emotions and all the connectivity of how you experience work off, and then you tune into your personal life, and you kept those two worlds completely separate as if that was just easy to do. And there was this idea that, hey, turn off your Blackberries we used to use before there were cell phones, and turn off your computers and put away all your files. And technology was the game changer, right? That technology changed how people went about trying to create work-life balance between their work life and personal life. Now, in the last couple of decades, what I have found to be more meaningful is work-life integration. And that is defined more with the idea of your work and non-work activities blend and mix throughout your day, right? That you can manage the integration of those two worlds without judging yourself for living an integrated life in which You may be at work right now, working on a major project, and then you get a text message from your family member, and you take a pause and you respond to it because it has some sense of urgency to respond, and then you go back to work, right? And that you don't have to completely shut yourself down from work or shut yourself down from your family or friends throughout your day. And being mindfully aware that, as mindfulness teaches us to be able to be present each moment at a time without judging ourselves, and to have a sense of observational awareness about what that means for us in that moment. So that's where I think work-life integration could be a more powerful approach for all of us to really live in that space. So I want to just pause there and just see anything you want to add to that before I move on.
I think that that's exactly like where we need to go, and then where we are going. The philosophy, the way you described that was ideal. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
textbook. I think it's the practice of it, and reminding ourselves that it is a practice, and that it's going to be clunky in nature at times. It won't be perfect. We will lose sight of where we're at in those moments. I think we're in this shift right now as a society of, how do I limit myself at times, even though I can get another report in, I could take on another
Mm-hmm.
client. Um, and also, I need to attend to myself. I need to attend to my family, and not feel the guilt or shame around that. I think for a long time, it has been, once you're out of the office, you're out of the
Mm-hmm.
office. As you said, with technology, we're never really out of the office. There's always another email that can come in. So the self-regulation piece is really what we all have to start cultivating in ourselves.
The word practice, that's the key, what you just said there. So let's pick up on a couple of topics I know you and I have talked about. And recently, in the last 4 years, since we've all gone through COVID, work-life integration has felt very different for most, right? So more recently, in a CNBC report that was, I think, released in September of 2023, there was reporting that 90% of major companies were projected to have their full workforce return to the office by the end of this current year, 2024, right? And that's ranging from maybe 1 day a week, 2 days a week, maybe 5 days a week in some cases. And I've seen that with clients and family members going through that process of transitioning. Now, with that reporting, what's also been interesting to learn is that even though during COVID, we had many workers working remotely from home for the safety of their well-being and the unknown of the COVID virus, there was some productivity improvements that were probably not expected. I think in 2020, as it reported, there was a 4.4% overall productivity improvement. And then in 2021, it was a bit more modest, but it was still 2.2% productivity improvement. And overall, over that period of time into 2023, last year, the third quarter of the year, there was as high as a 3.7% productivity improvement demonstrated by people working from their homes, being able to get on a meeting call through teleconferencing and be able to walk out of their home office or desk and go and prepare their meals or start their laundry or help their child with their homework, right? Or do any kind of errands throughout the day. It was a lot more convenient. And
Mhm.
so the irony in all of that is, now that there's this idea to get back into the offices, and some of the executives that have made these decisions have stated that the concerns are about productivity, about collaboration, about employee engagement. And the overarching theme is this idea that, will employees really be loyal to the culture of their organization if they're not connecting in person? Which I would say is probably more of a myth in just speaking to that point, because I think that in many cases, I've talked to clients that have said, I feel actually more engaged, that I'm getting this kind of flexibility in the work that I do, but I don't make those corporate decisions yet. A lot of these hardworking people are experiencing this kind of stress and figuring out, okay, now my world has kind of been turned upside down. And how do I get to a place where I have the kind of work-life integration where I can feel good about my experience when I'm working and feel good about living my life according to the kind of belief and system of operating my life that I want.
Mhm.
So as we get into this, I'm going to be curious to hear from you to talk about, in your answers to the questions I have for you, how this might have experienced, or this experience might have felt different for someone who's working in a corporate role or an employment of a job versus someone who's an entrepreneur or small business owners. As you and I know, work-life integration is just the way you have to go. There's no way other way around that, right?
Yeah.
So really, really interested in hearing your thoughts, LJ. So let's get right into the questions.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll start with just getting from you, what are some ways that you would recommend to our listeners to develop the capacity for work-life integration using mindfulness practices?
Mm. The first thing I would say is checking in with what your season is, what your seasons are. And what I mean by that is, when are you the most productive and when is it the time that you need to relax? Now, not everyone can work at 2 in the morning, 1 in the morning, but if you're in a role where you have to create some code, or if you have to work internationally, maybe it is taking some of those roles that will be communicating with people at a later time. But also recognizing, like, if the morning time for you is when you're the most productive, put the work part of the day there, and all those enjoyable aspects of the day where you don't have to try as hard, you don't have to do as much. Maybe it is the logistical piece that kind of comes a little bit more natural to you. That might go later in the day. I think that for the longest time, when we were in the 9 to 5 mindset, or 9 to 12, whatever it may be, we're stuck in, I have to do my commute. I have to
Mm,
do everything according to what my corporate setting is allowing me to do. If you're at home or you're working from home, maybe your workout is the very beginning of your day, so you can get that neurotic energy out before having to engage and sit in front of a computer for 3 to 4 hours. Being able to look at, like, okay, how much of a break do I need between communicating with my emails and then actually engaging with other people within my community. I think that we've been kind of programmed to just show
mhm,
up and, like, this is what you're told to do, so you have to do this. And now we have this free range, and it's easy to say,
mm,
well, I can go do this mindless task, or I can do mindless scrolling right now during my break time, where that's actually keeping you in an emotional connection with something that's not serving you. Whereas it might
mhm,
have been taking that walk around the block is the recharge point, taking your dog outside for a bit, letting your dog walk you. Um, but really recognizing your own flow of the day. I think that was something that I had to work through in the beginning, where I see most of my clients in the morning, and then
mm.
I am doing most of my networking later in the day. That doesn't mean I don't have any clients later in the day, but I just know that that is when I'm the most focused. So I want to be present with my clients during that time. Um, it does mean that I wake up earlier in the morning to get my workout in. It also means that I schedule out time for when I'm going to be in my play mode. I think that that's something that I didn't learn until I was doing more contract work, was really, leveraging your calendar in a way that you're putting in the self-care pieces as well. You might have a 10-15 minute gap to where you can go and listen to a meditation or just practice your breathing. And that refreshment point can allow you to come in with a different type of focus when you're having to go into a new meeting with new people that have no context of what you just went through for the last 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah, that is really powerful, connecting the constellation dots, what you just said, right? So let me go back to a couple things you said. Be in your season, know what time works best for you, knowing your own nervous system, knowing how your system works best, right? Maybe you're a later afternoon versus a morning person. You know, you're a morning person. You get your workout, you get energized, you get into it. So that was really critical. Being present, not allowing the preciousness of time, which time is the currency of life. So if you're like just scrolling without getting served in that process, to reevaluate that without judgment, but reevaluate that. Is that the best allocation of that time? And I especially love putting in playtime, right? To play mode. I work with a lot of couples, and I often refer to play as the sixth love language, that, play together, right? Connect with people that empower you to feel more human being. So you really hit a lot of really core points there that are valuable. Anything else you want to add to that maybe someone who is saying, well, gosh, that sounds great, LJ, but I also have limitations. Maybe I don't have the time, or maybe I don't have the resources, or I don't have a gym to get to. There's always some kind of restrictions that we can find if we look for them.
Totally. And the one thing I tell all my clients and everybody I work with, you'll never have the time. Like, you truly have to make time, and really looking at yourself of like, do you value yourself? Do you value, like, if there was something valuable, you would make the time to go to a show, pay for something. Like, you find the money, you find the resources in a lot of ways for things that we don't have them in the moment. But when it comes to yourself as being a valuable resource to others, other people will invest that time in you if you're vocal about what your needs are. And I know that can be scary to talk within your company or talk within your family system about that. But establishing that piece first, that you will value yourself, I think that other people respect that and they honor that as well. I have 2 kids, an amazing wife who is in corporate America as well. So we're grinding all the time. And I really value how she's gotten me to take time for myself. And I've had to look at, what does that mean for me? Like I said, I was an athlete for many years. So being able to have movement in my day as a therapist and a coach where I'm sitting most of the day, I don't have a lot of time, but I will put it in there of, I am going to do some movement. It doesn't mean I have to do a hard hour exercise. It could be, 5 minutes of just grooving to a song that I like. It could be 5 minutes of just stretching. But the play piece, actually for me, that came from when I worked for a company called Mindbody, where I was a logistics coordinator there while I was going through my master's program. And I was going and commuting to Santa Barbara 1 day a week for 9 hours, missing one day out of one day out of the 5-day work week. And there was always like an endless amount of things to do. But I found it when I started practicing mindfulness, when I started being aware of my own emotional reaction to, oh, there's all this stuff to do. And I started reflecting on, okay, I have to get this stuff done, and I have 10 minutes here. What do I want to use that for? And really charting that out for myself. I started getting everything done at a really productive rate, to the point where when I was in school, I was getting more done than when I wasn't in school, and I had the 5 minutes.
Amazing. Wow. So I'm going to highlight compliments to your wife. Great partnership, right? Great partnership. Who you choose
valuable
to have as a partner makes a difference.
Truly.
Yeah.
My wife, and she can tell you her story, but she immigrated to this country and she's in the same rooms as people who have been born and raised here, have had every privilege, and she brings truth and resilience to the table every day. And so I look at her as, an example of, what happens when you put your mind to something and when you put the intentions in front of you, because then it's like, where you're going, and there will be struggle and things are difficult, and they can be difficult, but that difficulty actually sharpens us. It makes us the person we're trying to be eventually.
Yeah. Well said. Hmm. So I want to transition and have you tap into some of your coaching experience even more. You talked a little bit about that. I'm curious about, how do you see the stressors of work and non-work activities differ when you're working with someone who may be like your wife, and my wife works for a corporation as well, right? That are living a corporate employee lifestyle versus the kind of lifestyle that you and I are living, where we're more independent business owners, having to do our own marketing, our own processing, logistics, and everything. And what are some of the recommendations you have for the two different constituents?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. One of the things I say, and I mean this with all respect for people in corporate America, is the lack of awareness around the emotional burden of what you're doing and how it affects the body.
Mm,
If, as a resource, The Body Keeps a Score by Dr. Basil
hmm
Vanderkolk, taught a whole
hmm
course using that book. It's important to know how the stress that's not alleviated at a certain point just affects the body and causes disease within it. And I see that a lot with my clients who are in corporate America, that there is this urgency and push to keep going and keep working for the greater
hmm
good of the company without actually checking their own oil, making sure that they're
hmm
running well. And those things, those interactions, there's a lack of awareness of the exchange that happens with some of these meetings, where it's, you
hmm
can go from one meeting with the exec team, and then you have to pass that information on to everyone you manage, and not really being able to have any time to process how you feel about it. And then that leaks out into when you're off work, right? I think, for us, we get to make a lot of decisions, which that can be
hmm
great. It can be stressful because you're the one that has to make the decision, but then we're also the one that we have to answer to. Whereas someone that's
Right.
really ingrained in that setting, where you have a manager, you have an exec team above you, you have investors, you're answering to so many people and you're trying to move something that's massive. But then not giving yourself the grace,
Mm,
to step back and acknowledge that you're human, that you have to, like, that you have too many things going on. Um, I think in the world of healing, um, and going through our own programs, the first thing they say is you have to
mhm,
spot your own burnout. You have to do self
mhm,
care. Um, one of the one of the phrases that I've kind of coined is, nurturing self care and constructive self care. We
hmm,
have to be able to look at it from a place of, nurturing self care is something that just feels good in the moment. It allows us to rest and relax and rejuvenate. But then constructive self care is that hard thing. It's like learning a language or an instrument. It beats up your ego. It doesn't feel good in the moment. But
mhm,
eventually, you build this strength and resilience through it. Those pieces can become nurturing down the road. And it's
mhm,
kind of learning when to employ those. Like, if we're tired and exhausted, constructive self care is not the way to go.
mhm,
Whereas we might just need something that feels really good in the moment. And if
mhm.
we're already recharged, doing nurturing self care might be counterproductive because, right, we're not growing. And that's something that I think, if we take the time for ourselves, we can really reflect on, where can we allocate those moments? When is a good time to kind of beat up on the ego and get stronger? And then when are those
Yeah,
times where it's good to just relax and notice what we're doing?
yeah. Having the discernment is what I'm hearing from you too, is to know when it's time to rest, right? When it's time to release. And I want to just follow up on something you said about the difference between nurturing and constructive, in terms of that self care piece. Have you found that with the nurturing, that not only meditation, which can be done in short, time frames, it could be 5, 10, 20, 30 minutes, however much time you need, any sensory work, like just, smelling a favorable aroma, or, movement. What
Oh,
have you advised your clients on regarding that piece of it?
oh yeah. I mean, yoga, tai chi, being able, like, you can't smell it, but there's incense burning in here,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
being able to have sage, have these these smells that actually allow you to
Mhm.
relax and lower the shoulders. You know, and sometimes it is engaging, just engagement with humans outside of our
Mhm.
realm of work, right? If we're talking finance all the time, or we're talking about trauma all day long, it's
Mhm.
nice to have a conversation that's not about what we do,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
For me, music is a big part of that. Pitch, tone, vibration. If
Mm.
you can just have some time to listen to some of your favorite songs, I think that's what's kept me out of burnout.
Mm.
Is my appreciation of music. I'm in no ways an artist. I'm still trying to learn a few guitar strings, but there's something about that that allows me to come down and relax that I really have enjoyed.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for that. I want to transition to something you kind of touched on, and I'm curious to hear from you, LJ. What role does relationship boundaries play in cultivating work life integration with a mindfulness attitude? Because as you talked about, right, there are those situations in a corporate environment that someone might have a responsibility to funnel down a message or funnel down a project initiative or deliverables. And they're coming out of a very intense interaction that has high priority, high urgency, and that kind of experience over time, those interactions may start to create relationships that are not healthy. And so, what have you seen in that regard, and how have you been able to help some of your clients with that challenge?
Yeah, I think this is even more difficult now because we have these hybrid models of work life where you could be sending 20 emails to someone and not getting a
Hmm.
response.
Hmm.
Um, I think that it is one looking at like what is the culture of the company and how they communicate, what are the styles of communication, whether that's using Slack, whether it is being able to pick up the phone and call someone. Um, and then the comfortability of being direct, because
Hmm.
sometimes the culture does not serve direct types
Hmm.
of employees. And I'm thinking of like, engineers, where it is crucial to be very direct and speak to the problem and the issue. Whereas if you're talking with someone in sales or
Hmm.
marketing, they might not receive that information as well. And so being able to have like an intention around what are you wanting from those hard conversations? How do you deal
Hmm.
with them? Is there a structure around like if productivity has gone down, how are you going to address it? Are there some verbal contracts or written contracts around that? I think that this is where that the executive teams are having a lot of issues because if they could just stop by a department
Hmm.
and just give a conversation, it might feel a little bit more there might be a sense of control in that setting
Aha.
versus okay, someone's at home, they haven't done what they're supposed to do, what's going on there, and the mind can kind of create this scenario that they're sitting there watching Netflix when really
Hmm.
maybe they've tried different ways of solving the problem, it's just not coming together. And checking in, like I think when I'm advising a manager, just asking them, is the person you're working with an introvert or an extrovert? And
Yeah.
that's not a good or bad thing, right? It's just
Hmm.
that someone that is introverted, they're going to be overly stimulated by a lot of conversation. Is the place that they have to operate at, like, is it healthy for them? It makes more sense for engineers to work from home a lot of the times because for them to have their own space, silence, and
Hmm.
they're good at communicating through these Slack channels. Whereas maybe sales needs to be in an office space where they're thriving off of each other's energies, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
These compromises, I think that that's it's difficult to have that because it's going against the old way of how things
Hmm.
work. And anytime there's change, it has to be talked about that it's happening, that it's not just this fixed way of being anymore. And I think depending on who I am coaching, um, I ask them what is their biggest concern, what is their fear. People don't like to
Mm.
talk about their fear. But sometimes it is fear of losing control, fear of not being productive enough. Um, and then even like, what are they seeing in that person they're having conflict with? Because as you know, as
Mm-hmm.
a therapist, a lot of times we're just mirrors of each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if something's coming up in the workplace and you're noticing it, it might be that
Mm-hmm.
reflection of, this is what I was like at a certain point. This is what I'm afraid of being. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to be seen that way. I don't want my org to look that way. And then just, how do we have difficult conversations? Um, the book Crucial Conversations is a great resource for managers starting to delve into productive conflict versus having just conflict that spins in circles.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great recommendation. I want to go a little further with you on this one. So I have found that I've heard from folks that have struggled with those kind of conversations and that type of conflict or interactivity or lack thereof, talk about how they're wondering if there's something else that they don't know that is going on. And particularly when they come from a non-centered population. So I can speak from being a Black Indigenous person of color, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that sometimes I can appreciate when I hear from a client that will say, well, I just feel like when I walk in the room, I'm not really one of the rest of the team, or I don't feel included or accepted or heard or even seen in some cases. And then that becomes dysregulating. And then it's like
Mm-hmm.
all these thoughts start to take over, the cognitive overload. What do I do in that situation? Because that's how I continue to experience these relationships with people. What would be some of the ways that you've been able to help with that kind of challenge that comes up from a more of an intersectionality and a uniqueness?
Yes, no, that conversation comes up a lot, and even for myself, making the transition back into working with corporate America, as I've grown my hair back out, I might
Mm-hmm.
come in with braids, or my fro is out. Um, that feeling or the sense of belonging everyone wants that.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going off of past experiences when we go into it, we're already losing. Like, we're already feeling like the outsider because we are using a past experience to dictate how these people perceive us. What I always recommend to my clients, leaning in to a little bit of that discomfort and challenging themselves to challenge the status quo. Maybe it is speaking up in a meeting. Maybe it is engaging with someone and finding the connection, whether it's loving sports, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's what they do for self-care. It's the passion for working for that company. Why did you choose that? Why are you in this org? But finding what is similar versus what is different. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that we value our differences and our uniqueness. That's very important. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
crucial. And we also have to find how we come back together. And I see that in so many conflicts is everyone's so focused on the differences. They're not willing to see the other person as human. And
Mm-hmm.
because of that, that becomes our biggest fear of not being seen as human or an equal. I noticed even in my own experience as a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
when I was coming up, I did not see other Black, Hispanic therapists around me.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to be vocal in my classes, in my supervision groups, speaking to what I was seeing, understanding that my view is unique and it would be a disservice not to speak to it, and not in a confrontational way, but
Right.
in an opening, right? In a curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's what's elevated my career in a lot of ways, is that I'm willing to lean into the shadow a bit.
Yeah, yeah. And the beauty of that, you just called it out, the fact that you have that the intersection of being Hispanic and Black,
Mm-hmm.
that integration. And when you said that, it made me think of Derek Bell talking about the idea that we shouldn't have to be a counter narrative because we have a uniqueness or a difference in what the status quo or the majority or centered group is. We have our own narrative. And to be curious
Right.
about, what does that feel like to lean in and be authentically true to yourself, right? Not trying to be something for someone else, but be true to yourself and propose questions that are curious questions that allow you to navigate where you can find spaces or people you can connect with that you can actually do some meaningful work with. That's a beautiful thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's lovely when you see it take shape, and usually it does have to come with our own modeling of it. Um, and I will say that there are times where it's like I tell all my clients, like, where do you feel this in your body?
Yes.
Because a lot of times we can think that anxiety is a bad thing and
Mhm.
we vilify it, but actually it might be that energy that's telling us we're about to do something amazing. It's
Mhm.
it's it's that checking that signal that something's up and we want to speak to it, but maybe we don't have the full capacity yet. And that's why, right, reflecting, journaling, being able to process a bit so that when you're ready to, you can release some of that information. I have found that I am getting a lot more comfortable in speaking to
Mm.
certain things that before I would never
Mm.
say in a room full of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and as I'm doing that more often, and I'm not doing it in a confrontational way or an angry way, it's just again, like, what is this thing that's up? I'm feeling it and I'm human. Are there other people that are feeling this thing? We're actually able to engage in it and have more fruitful conversations.
Yeah. That's empowering. That's creating that interdependence that makes a difference, right? And
Mm-hmm.
what you talked about, LJ, also resonates with this sense of acceptance from a mindfulness standpoint. Acknowledging things as they are instead of what we think they should be is free, right? It allows you to detach from what happened in the
Yes.
past to say, let me be in this moment right now. That is really,
Right.
really wonderful to hear you speak to that. All right. So I want to get to a question that is kind of a pull through, and I want you to feel free to expand on this. What are some of the optimal resources to leverage for someone who is in a situation where they're listening to this and thinking, well, that sounds great, but I'm a working parent, or I'm a single parent, or I travel, right? I'm on a plane 3 times a month, and I'm trying to figure out how do I integrate my work life and use mindfulness to kind of keep me grounded, keep me healthy and whole. Any additional ideas you would propose to someone in those situations?
As a parent, breathe. you got, you got to
Yeah.
breathe. And I mean, like I said, I have two amazing kids that keep me really busy. And being able to incorporate a breathing practice, not
Mhm.
just with myself, but with them, even like teaching them, like, what happens when your hands clench up
Mhm.
and what does it feel like when you release them?
Mm.
Doing body scanning,
Yeah.
recognizing the awareness that we usually try to avoid if we're not feeling good. But I always start with, 4x4 breathing,
Mhm.
box
Yeah.
breathing, just understanding that usually we are off rhythm. And if we stubbed our toe in the morning, someone cuts us off on the way
Mhm.
to work, we can just be in that clenched mode. But if you have an active practice of recognizing your breath and how to slow it down, um, you're going to be able to be present versus breathe like it was 5 hours ago and you were angry.
Mhm.
Um, but again, that, like, something that we do at my house with the kids is hold counsel,
Oh.
and we, use a talking stick, and each person talks about, their highs and lows or what's up for them. And it is just this practice of being able to express and to be heard
Mm.
and to also listen. Because I think those things are core elements we have to ingrain in our kids,
Mhm.
because if they don't feel heard by adults, then they won't feel that adults ever hear them.
Mhm.
And I see that with a lot of my younger clients that are starting to adult, is there's a big fear of not being able to express themselves when they need to. And so if we start early with them, and it's also us as
Yeah.
parents
Yeah.
being able to
Definitely.
express, hey, dad's having a tough day.
Mhm.
I'm getting beat up, like, but this is what I'm doing. I think it's a way to help, bond when you don't have a lot of time.
Mhm.
Um, one of the other things that, like, even like on the plane, I never, for traveling for me, I get
Mm-hmm.
anxious, going through security, doing all that. That's something that comes up for me. But I start to look forward to the actual plane ride now, which might seem a little weird, but you're stuck for several hours, right? And you can't move, you can't go anywhere. Like, now they allow Wi-Fi, but for a while they didn't allow Wi-Fi, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what a beautiful opportunity to be with self, right? Like, just to be able to take the notebook out and just write out some of the things that may be on the to-do list, some of the pieces that you're noticing are coming up for you. And then again, like, incorporating meditation at that point. It doesn't mean that you're going to stop all the thoughts, but if you can be present with them, if you can just exhale a little bit longer, relax into it. Again, the body scan is so important because people are becoming detached from their
Yeah.
bodies,
Yeah.
especially as we're looking at
Yeah.
screens. If you're just focused on watching a movie for that 3-4 hours on that flight, you're going to get off and you're going to be emotionally loaded from whatever movie you watched, and you're going to be more exhausted. But if you spend that time with self for a moment, you might notice, like, wow, this knot that I've had in my shoulder, wow, that's been there for a while. Like, can
Yeah.
I just, like, lower my shoulders a bit? And honestly, movement outside of the airplane, not on an airplane, but what is your relationship with movement? This really gets downplayed, where it's either you have to have this really intense workout, or
Mm.
that, like, I have to have a full hour, when really it's just like, you
No.
don't. If you can just do a little bit. And I love your videos, by the way, where I see you walking and
Mm-hmm.
moving and grooving. Like, you can see your mood
Mm-hmm.
shift as you're walking.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a core part of us as human beings, is to have some type of movement. But again, we're going against who we are in being at a computer all day long, not going to the restroom because we got to jump into the next meeting. Um, it doesn't take long for us to, create an unhealthy environment for
Yeah.
self, when we have all the opportunities, really, to say, I need this for self. But the internal monologue can get so loud,
Yes.
saying that, nope, I will be punished if I am not present at all times. I think that's the misconception with mindfulness, that you have to be fully present all the time, never,
Mm.
never have an outburst. You're calm all the time. It's like, I can tell you, I am not calm all the time.
Neither am I. I share
Right?
that.
But it's the, what is it that in this situation
Mm-hmm.
makes me feel less calm? Can I be curious about it? Can I open that narrative up with myself?
Yeah, I appreciate everything you shared. And what kind of stood out to me is when you said the beauty of being with yourself, right? That having that ability to be with yourself and to experience that sense of mindful awareness about your body system, right? Too often I find that
Mm.
I remind my clients to not allow their head to drag around their bodies, right? Like they're just top sided and their bodies are just kind of going along for the walk or the movement of the day. And it's like, have you checked in lately in your system? Have you kind of felt what's happening internally and allowing that the experience to be meaningful for you other than just getting through the day, right? And so I really appreciate what you just recommended.
Right.
One other point I want to ask before I get to our wrap up is there is this debate, I think, that's out there about technology. And we see the APA is talking about tablets and phones and facing screens and technology, right? So, I use all the social media platforms for purposes to educate because I'm an educator and a psychotherapist, and I want to share information, influence, and engage people in the kind of ideas that could be healthy and sustainable. But there is this real
Mm.
fine line. It's very nuanced about how does technology either help or harm. What is your take on that?
Yeah. So I was studying social media when I
Mm-hmm.
was in grad school. And so that was before TikTok. Instagram was
Mm-hmm.
fairly new. And with all these technologies, like, it's been the same through society. There's always a peak when it comes to new technologies coming in and mental health having issues around it. Mental health wasn't a focal point for so many years in past, but now we have this really big understanding that, okay, our mental health is important. I believe that we need to use these things as tools and not as our end all be all of happiness. And unfortunately, that's what happens a lot of times with the younger generation is we give them an iPad, we give them this thing to engage with so we can have free time as adults. I think this is shifting as we have more understanding around it, because we're seeing the first generation of kids that were born with iPads, that were born with these things. We've had TV, our whole lives, but again, once the TV's off, or even like the show we want to watch is done, we're done watching, we go outside, we do something else. Now you can binge watch something. And that's become something that's a cultural norm of binging. And when has binging ever been a healthy thing?
Is a warning
but
by
now we
just the terminology.
Right. Right. I do see, I do see a shift happening again, as we are understanding that like looking at a screen is not healthy for us all day long, but we do need to use these things. We have to remember that there has to be time away from them, and we have to have all parts of self honored, not just that nice dopamine hit that we might get from scrolling and going through. One of the things that I've been doing for the last, I think 3-4 years is
I love
post
your Mindful Monday
videos on all
I
my
love
social
them.
media.
I watch every one.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And one of the reasons I do that, I mean, they're not scripted. I don't add anything, but it's been a reflection for me of, okay, if half of what is put out there is negative, and it's like the car crash piece of we want to see something bad happen, can we counter that? And can we give insight? You can't see, everyone in therapy or everyone for coaching. But if I can give a simple reframe, or if I can bring in the concept of mindfulness to 1 or 2 people as they see it and they pass that along, then we start to create a positive reframe for the technology, right? It has served us. It has educated us, but also we have to have those boundaries with it as well.
I tend to align with you on that belief. And I know that the technology we have today has the same level of scrutiny that we got when I was a teenager and we had boom boxes, right? And they were too loud, and oh my gosh. Right. And, they're ruining these kids' ears and their ability to hear and focus because they're walking around with their boom boxes listening to that hip hop. And so it's great that just talking to you right now, hearing how you use the technology as a tool, right? Not as a means of fulfilling oneself. It's a critical point that I hope the listeners listen to and do that in a non-judgmental way with children, right? Because teenagers, that's what they've known.
Yes.
They're born into this world that this is what the world looks like for them. It's not necessarily new. It's just the way the world is. And so we've got to make it useful and healthy for all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Balance. It's finding a balance. I think that's what we all, want to do and can do. But it is the reflection of what is the relationship with this object or this thing. Just like it is with substances, just like it is with personal relations. What is my relationship with this? Is this overtaking my day to day? Is it obstructing me from my own enjoyment or fulfillment? Or is it empowering me to be able to connect, reach out, and learn?
And I'll make one other final point about this. As you said, that the balance is that work-life integration, mindfulness, that as someone's working their day, it's not, a horrible thing to go out and post something positive if you want to do that, or look at something positive like your Mindful Mondays. I go to LinkedIn and I'm excited to see you there, bringing that. I'm absorbing every bit of it, and I'm hoping what I'm putting out there for you, it's landing well on you as well. And so we really want to create an ecosystem that people can know that you don't have to cut off your life into these separate domains or dimensions, but you can integrate mindfulness in how you go about life and practicing your life with a balance and a nurturance. So LJ, as I wrap up, I just want to
Yes.
say thank you for the gift of your knowledge and your experience and perspective. As you know, I have tremendous respect for you as a friend and as a colleague. And so I'm just so grateful that you were willing to participate today. And I hope for all the listeners, I invite you to subscribe to this podcast on any of your chosen platforms. Check out the Mind Solve YouTube channel to stay up to date on these great episodes like we had today with LJ. And please, if you like it and share it with others who you believe could benefit from this information. With that, I want to wish you all to be mindful and to choose joy. Thank you.
Thank you.